A scruffy guide. The night air in Willow Creek felt heavy, the kind of dense, oppressive silence that only a forest could provide. Ryan Jacobs could hear nothing except the occasional rustle of branches as his boots sank into the wet earth, the underbrush crinkling underfoot. He glanced at his phone, checking the time for what felt like the 100th time. Over an hour had passed since the search had started. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness. But no matter how much they searched, the mystery only deepened. "I swear, if this dog leads us to another dead end, I'm going to lose my mind," Ryan muttered, his voice hoarse and filled with frustration. He tightened his grip on the flashlight, the beam flicking across the trees that loomed over him like silent giants. This wasn't the first time the team had been missiled by some stray animal, but the dog that had appeared earlier, a scruffy, unkempt golden mutt, was different. It wasn't just aimlessly darting around. It seemed purposeful, like it had something to show them, something important. But that didn't make Ryan's growing frustration any easier to bear. It had all started just outside the old diner, that quiet spot at the edge of town where the streets met the wilderness. The dog had come from nowhere, suddenly appeared out of the brush, frantic, almost desperate. At first, Ryan and his friend Luke had brushed it off. After all, stray dogs were a dime a dozen in these parts. But this dog, wasn't like the others. It wasn't just barking. It was almost pleading with them. Ryan watched as the dog darted ahead, stopping, glancing over its shoulder to make sure they were still following. It had nipped at Luke's jacket, clearly trying to get their attention. The urgency in the animal's eyes was undeniable. There was something strange about it, a raw, unspoken sense of importance. "I don't like this," Ryan had said, hesitating as the dog glanced back again, its tail flicking nervously. He pulled out his phone and called for help. Soon, a small search party had gathered. Sheriff Dale Murphy, Luke, volunteer firefighter Aaron Miller, and a couple of others from the community joined them, each of them looking at the dog like it was the key to some kind of puzzle. The dog, however, didn't falter. It moved with unyielding certainty, guiding them further and further from the town, along narrow, barely discernible paths, and through dense woods. The trees towered overhead, their leaves rustling softly in the wind, as if the forest itself was trying to keep its secrets hidden. The dog weaved through the thick underbrush, like it had been living in the forest for years, tail high, nose to the ground, urging them onward. "This dog is on a mission," Erin muttered under her breath as she adjusted her flashlight, her eyes narrowing as they picked up the pace. "Yeah, and I hope it's not just a raccoon up a tree," Luke joked, kicking aside a fallen branch, though his voice had the unmistakable edge of tension beneath the humor. Despite his best efforts to remain calm, Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He felt it deep in his bones, that prickling sensation that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The further they went, the more he felt it, the overwhelming sense that they were getting closer to something important. Then, as they ventured deeper into the woods, the dog suddenly stopped. No bark, no movement, just a sudden, unnatural stillness in the air. Ryan's stomach dropped as he noticed the dog's ears perk up, its body rigid with caution. It looked ahead, nose twitching, then slowly turned to face Ryan and the others, eyes wide and intense. "What is it, boy?" Ryan whispered, stepping forward, his voice barely louder than a breath. The dog let out a low whine, almost as if it was trying to communicate something beyond the grasp of words. It took a few hesitant steps forward, its body trembling with unease, then stopped again at the base of a gnarled oak tree. For a long moment, the group stood frozen, the night suddenly feeling eerily still. The dog curled up near the base of the tree, tail wrapped around its legs as it sat down, its eyes fixed on the ground beneath it. It was as if the dog was waiting for them to understand, to act. Ryan stepped forward, heart pounding in his chest. He shone his flashlight at the base of the tree, expecting to see nothing more than roots and leaves. But as the beam swept across the ground, his breath caught in his throat. There was something there. He rushed toward the spot, calling out to the others, his voice shaking with an urgency he hadn't felt before. "Over here. I think I found something." Sheriff Murphy was the first to reach him, crouching down, his trained eyes scanning the area. There, half buried beneath a blanket of dirt and fallen leaves, was a bundle of fabric, something child-sized, a jacket perhaps, its color nearly indistinguishable in the dim light. Luke cursed softly under his breath, his hand running through his hair in disbelief. "No way," Erin whispered, her voice thick with shock. "Oh my God." Ryan's mind raced as he dropped to his knees, clearing the leaves away with frantic hands. The fabric was damp, caked with dirt, but as he pulled it up, a chill ran through him. It was a child's coat, familiar, out of place. "What the hell?" Luke muttered, voice cracking. Ryan's heart was racing, but before he could fully process what they were seeing, a faint cry pierced the silence. At first it was so weak that Ryan thought his mind had played tricks on him. But then he heard it again. A whimper, a tiny broken voice. "Help," the child whispered. Ryan froze, his flashlight trembling in his grip. The light moved over the ground, barely illuminating the small figure, barely visible among the tree roots. A tiny child, no older than 6 or 7, curled up in the dirt, dirty and bruised, eyes wide with fear. Ryan's pulse quickened as he knelt beside her. The dog, the scruffy mutt that had led them here, stepped forward, lying down next to the girl, as if it had been guarding her the entire time. This wasn't just a stray dog, it was a lifeline, the unlikely guardian. Ryan's heart pounded in his chest as he knelt beside the small girl, his hands trembling as he brushed the dirt from her tiny face. Her blonde hair was matted, streaked with dirt and dried tears, but it was her eyes that haunted him. The pupils were dilated, wide and glassy, as though she hadn't slept in days. Fear and exhaustion radiated from her fragile body, but even in her weakened state, there was a glimmer of recognition in her gaze. She seemed to see him, but then her eyelids fluttered and closed, as though the effort to remain awake was just too much. Ryan's breath hitched in his throat. Hey, stay with me," he whispered urgently, his voice cracking. "It's going to be okay. We're here to help you." His words seemed to rattle the stillness of the forest, but the girl didn't respond. Her tiny frame was cold to the touch, and Ryan could feel the weight of her body as he gently cradled her against his chest. She was so small, so fragile. He couldn't believe she had been out here alone for God knows how long. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening. How did she end up here? And why had the dog led them to her? The dog, the mutt who had guided them through the woods, was now standing beside Ryan, its tail wagging slightly, though it was still tense. The dog's eyes never strayed from the girl. It was as though the two shared an unspoken bond, something deeper than just the events of that night. The dog had known. Somehow, it had known that this little girl needed saving. Ryan looked down at the dog, feeling the deep sense of gratitude. No, awe, at the animal's determination. This stray dog, abandoned and likely living on the fringes of society, had done something remarkable. It had led them through the woods, found the girl in the darkest part of the forest, and, in its own way, had guarded her like a true protector. Ryan reached down and gently stroked the dog's scruffy fur, his mind still struggling to comprehend the events unfolding before him. "You're a good boy, aren't you?" Ryan murmured, more to himself than anyone else. The dog's ears flicked, and it let out a soft huff, as if acknowledging the praise. But it didn't take its eyes off the girl, its posture still vigilant, its presence steady. Ryan was struck by how the dog had not hesitated, had not given up. It had led them to the girl, and now it wouldn't leave her side. There was something almost sacred in the way the dog refused to move away, like it had made a silent promise to protect her. "Sheriff." Aaron Miller called from behind him, breaking Ryan's trance. "I've called for backup. They're on their way, but we need to get her out of here now." Ryan nodded, the urgency in her voice snapping him back into action. He carefully adjusted the girl in his arms, cradling her as gently as possible. His heart ached as he looked down at her fragile form. This child had been through hell. She didn't deserve this. No one did. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, and Sheriff Dale Murphy arrived at Ryan's side, his trained eyes scanning the scene. He crouched down beside the girl, checking her pulse and breathing, his movements efficient but gentle. "She's alive," the sheriff confirmed, his voice steady despite the obvious weight of the situation. "But we need to move fast. She's hypothermic and in shock." Ryan's grip on the girl tightened as he stood, carefully lifting her into his arms. Her small body barely stirred, but he could feel the cold seeping through her, the chill of the night still clinging to her skin. His mind was spinning with questions. How had she ended up alone in the woods? Where were her parents? Had someone hurt her? But right now, those questions had to wait. Getting her out of the woods was the only thing that mattered. "Let's get moving," Ryan urged, his voice calm but tinged with urgency. He turned and began walking back the way they had come, the dog trotting loyally at his side. Its brown eyes remained fixed on the girl, unwavering, as if it knew its job wasn't finished yet. The rescue team followed close behind, their flashlights cutting through the forest as they navigated the dark path with careful precision. The journey back seemed to stretch on forever. The forest that had once seemed full of mystery now felt oppressive, its shadows looming like dark specters. Every step Ryan took, he felt the weight of the girl's life in his arms. Every breath she took, every shallow rise and fall of her chest, kept him moving forward, kept him pushing through the dense underbrush. He couldn't let her down now. He couldn't let this be the end of her story. Behind them, the rescue team was in motion. Aaron talking into her radio, Luke scanning the path ahead, his eyes sharp for any hazards. Sheriff Murphy kept close, his steady presence a comfort in the chaos. But it was the dog, always there, always vigilant, that captured Ryan's attention. The dog had not left them for a moment. It had led them to the girl, and now it walked alongside them, just as committed as ever, its eyes never leaving her. It was more than just an animal. It was a symbol of resilience. The team pressed forward, the glow of the town's streetlights beginning to pierce the darkness ahead. They were almost out of the woods, but Ryan couldn't shake the question that had been building in his mind since they first found the girl. Who had left her here? And why? As they emerged from the woods, the sound of sirens reached their ears, the distant wail of an ambulance growing louder. Ryan's eyes stayed focused on the girl in his arms, his mind racing with the many unanswered questions. But one thing was clear. The dog had saved her. The search for answers. The sharp flash of the ambulance's lights cut through the trees, casting fleeting shadows on the forest floor as Ryan carried the girl, her frail body pressed against his chest. Each step felt heavier than the last, the weight of the moment settling deeper within him. The distant hum of sirens grew louder, but Ryan didn't allow himself to look back. His eyes were focused only on the path ahead, on the girl whose life now depended on getting her to safety. Behind him, the dog trotted faithfully, never once straying from their side. It kept its eyes locked on the girl, tail wagging with quiet determination. The bond between them was undeniable. This dog had known what needed to be done, and it had led them here. But as the girl's body remained cold in Ryan's arms, he couldn't shake the burning questions in his mind. Who was this child? Where had she come from? And why had she been left in the woods to fend for herself? Ryan's grip tightened around the girl as they reached the edge of the woods. The sight of the town's streetlights peeking through the trees gave him a fleeting sense of relief, but he knew that the real work was just beginning. The rescue team was nearly there, but the puzzle of what had happened still remained unsolved. Sheriff Murphy was the first to reach the edge of the woods. His flashlight swept across the path ahead, the team quickly following his lead. As they crossed the threshold of the forest, the glow of the ambulance lights illuminated the scene. paramedics rushed to meet them, moving quickly to set up the stretcher, ready to take the girl to safety. Ryan hesitated for just a moment before gently placing the girl on the stretcher. Her fragile frame barely moved, but Ryan could still feel the warmth of her tiny fingers clutching the edge of his coat. A faint sigh escaped her lips, but her eyes remained closed, her breathing shallow. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The noise of the forest, the lights, the urgency of the situation. It all felt distant as Ryan stood there, watching the paramedics take over. He glanced down at the dog, still standing faithfully by the stretcher. The dog's gaze met his, and for a brief moment, Ryan saw something almost human in its eyes. This wasn't just an animal. It was a protector, a guardian, one that had led them to the girl when no one else could have. "Good boy," Ryan whispered, bending down to run his hand over the dog's fur. The dog's tail wagged softly, but it didn't stray, its eyes still locked on the girl, as if making sure she was safe now. "Amazing," Aaron Miller muttered from behind him, her voice filled with disbelief. "This dog, it found her. It led us right to her." Ryan nodded, his mind still reeling. "Yeah, but how did it know? It wasn't just random. This dog was on a mission." Sheriff Murphy crouched beside the stretcher, checking the girl once more before speaking into his radio. "We need a full medical team, stat. This girl's in bad shape." Ryan stepped back, allowing the paramedics to do their work. His gaze drifted to the dog again. It seemed almost too calm for the chaos surrounding it, like it had seen this before, or perhaps had been waiting for this moment. Ryan felt a knot form in his stomach as he thought about the night's events. It hadn't been a coincidence. This dog had brought them here for a reason, and that reason was far from over. As the paramedics loaded the girl into the ambulance, Ryan turned to the group, his voice thick with emotion. "We need to figure out who she is. How did she get here?" Luke, who had been standing quietly to the side, finally spoke. "There's got to be a record of missing children, right? We'll find her, Ryan. We'll figure this out." But Ryan wasn't so sure. His mind was consumed with questions. The dog had led them to her, but what about the rest of the story? Who had left her in the woods? Why hadn't anyone noticed her missing sooner? He glanced at the dog once more, its gaze still focused on the ambulance, before turning to Sheriff Murphy. "I don't think this is a coincidence, Sheriff," Ryan said. "This dog, he's more than just a stray. He knew exactly what he was doing." Sheriff Murphy nodded thoughtfully, his eyes scanning the dog. "I agree. And we'll look into this, but for now, we need to focus on getting that little girl the help she needs. She's been through too much already." The ambulance doors slammed shut, and the siren blared as it sped away, heading toward the hospital. Ryan stood frozen for a moment, watching the lights disappear into the distance. The questions still gnawed at him, but he knew they'd have to wait. Turning back toward the dog, Ryan noticed something strange. The dog was now standing still, its body tense, its eyes scanning the woods. It was as if the animal was waiting for something else to happen. Ryan took a step closer, his voice soft. "You did your part, buddy," he murmured. "You've done more than enough." But the dog didn't move. It continued to stare into the woods, its tail flicking slightly as though it had more to say. Ryan felt a strange sense of unease. What had this dog seen? What had it been through? Aaron, who had been on the radio coordinating with the emergency team, walked up beside him. "What do we do with him now?" she asked, glancing at the dog. Ryan didn't answer immediately. He knelt down, his hand resting on the dog's back. He wasn't sure what to make of this animal or what had happened that night. All he knew was that the dog had led them to the girl, and it had protected her when no one else could. "I don't know," Ryan said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of the unknown. "But we can't just leave him here. Not after everything he's done." The dog looked back at Ryan, its eyes full of silent understanding. There was a bond between them now, a shared moment that transcended words, a connection that only the strange, unpredictable paths of life could forge. The dog had been his guide through the dark. And now, as the team stood in the clearing, Ryan knew they weren't done yet. There was still so much to uncover. And with that thought, the forest seemed to exhale, as if releasing the grip it had on them all. But the questions remained, still unanswered, still waiting for the truth to reveal itself. A new beginning. The following days after the rescue felt like a blur to Ryan. The girl, whose name turned out to be Emma, had been rushed to the hospital where she received the care she desperately needed. Her physical injuries were not as severe as initially feared, but the emotional scars, those were the ones that would take longer to heal. Emma had no memory of how she ended up in the woods or what had happened before. She simply said that she had been lost. Her parents, who had reported her missing days before, had been notified immediately. But as the days passed, it became clear that something was wrong. Emma's parents, a young couple in their early 30s, didn't seem to know much about their daughter's disappearance either. Emma's case became a bit of a mystery. How had she wandered so far from home, into the forest, without anyone noticing? But there was one thing that everyone could agree on. Without that scruffy mutt, without the dog that had led them to her, Emma might not have made it out alive. As the days went by, Ryan found himself going back to the site of the rescue, standing at the edge of the woods, staring into the darkening trees. The dog, who had led them to Emma, had disappeared after the rescue. He hadn't followed them back to the town, nor had anyone seen him in the days after. It was like the dog had simply vanished, as if it had fulfilled its purpose, and now its work was done. Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that the dog's presence had been no accident, that it had known something no one else did. But there were no answers to be found, no explanations. It wasn't a stray that simply stumbled upon the scene. It was a protector, a guide. And in Ryan's heart, he knew that the dog had not just saved Emma's life. It had saved his own too. Ryan hadn't realized it at the time, but the night in the woods had changed him. It wasn't just the rescue, or the strange bond he felt with the dog. It was the reminder that sometimes the world offered us opportunities to make a difference when we least expected it. In that moment, when everything seemed uncertain and out of control, the dog had been a symbol of hope. It had refused to give up. And so, Ryan found himself thinking more about the choices he had made in his own life. He had spent years focused on his work, on his duties as a rescue worker. But how much of his life had he missed in the process? How many times had he passed by opportunities to make a real impact simply because he was too busy or too distracted? The dog had shown him something important. Life was fleeting, and it was the moments when we reach out and help others that define who we are. The next morning, Ryan made a decision. He didn't know where the dog had gone or if he would ever see it again. But he knew he couldn't let that feeling of hope slip away. The bond they had shared, however brief, had sparked something inside him. He went to the shelter that morning, not to volunteer as he had done before, but to adopt a dog. A dog who, like the one that had led him to Emma, would be his companion. Not just a pet, but a reminder that there was more to life than work, than rushing from one task to the next. There was kindness to be found in the smallest of gestures, and sometimes it was a dog who would show you that. The moment he walked into the shelter, he knew what he had to do. There, in one of the kennels, was a dog that looked just like the one that had saved Emma's life. The moment the dog saw Ryan, its eyes softened, and Ryan felt an instant connection. It wasn't the same dog. It couldn't be. But it was enough. He knew that by adopting this dog, he was making a choice to honor the spirit of the one who had led them through the woods. Ryan named him Chance. And as the days turned into weeks, Chance became more than just a companion. He became a reminder of the bond that transcended words, of the quiet courage it took to stand by someone in their darkest moments. Emma continued her recovery, and she began to open up to the people around her. It took time, but the girl who had once been so scared, so vulnerable, was finding her strength again. As for Ryan, he found his own transformation. He became more present, not just in his work, but in his relationships. but in the lives of those around him. His connection with chance became a symbol of the resilience that both humans and animals share, a reminder that even in the hardest of times, there is always hope, always someone or something waiting to guide us through. The stray dog, the one who had led them to Emma, remained an unsolved mystery. But to Ryan, it didn't matter. The dog's purpose had been fulfilled. And now, it was up to Ryan to live his life in a way that honored that simple, powerful truth, that sometimes it only takes a single act of kindness to change a life forever. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.